Hi, and welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording, and I am so excited to share today's episode with you. I'm chatting with Dr. James R. Doty. So Dr. Doty has been on the faculty of the Stanford University School of Medicine since 1997 in the neurosurgery department as a professor and more recently adjunct professor. He is also the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE, at Stanford. And he also is he's an inventor, an interpreter, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist. He holds multiple patents. He's the former CEO of Accuray. He's given support to a number of charitable organizations. He talks a little bit about that in today's episode. He supported research, provided scholarships, endowed chairs at multiple universities. He also has been a consultant to medical device companies, and in addition to working as an operating partner and advisor to venture capital firms, he serves on the board of a number of nonprofits and is also the former vice chair of the Charter for Compassion International and the former chair of the Dalai Lama Foundation. He's also on the senior advisory board of the Council for the Parliament of the World's Religions and serves on the board of governors of Tulane University School of Medicine. In addition to all that, Dr. Doty is a New York Times best-selling author of Into the Magic Shop, Neuroscience, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, which has been translated into 36 languages. So he talks a little bit today about that journey, that magic shop moment. But he's also the author of a brand new book called Mind Magic, The Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything. And I know that manifestation is a topic that comes up a lot in today's world. And we talk a lot about kind of what people are getting wrong about manifestation, what unintentional manifestation can look like. We talk about what things can block our manifestation. But we also talk a lot about the actual neuroscience of manifestation. I think that what I find so appealing about Dr. Doty's work is that he's showing us from a scientific perspective that this isn't bullshit. This is real physiological stuff. And it's really cool to hear his perspective as a clinician and a researcher and someone who also cares deeply about others, and why we talk a lot about this in this episode, why compassion is so important for manifestation. So yeah, you guys know I am allergic to small talk, so there's some big stuff in this episode. So I hope that you guys enjoy, and without further ado, let's get to it. Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Dr. Doty, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you today. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I was really excited to chat with you today because I really, really appreciate what you share about manifestation and all the things that we're really, that we're really having a difficult time understanding and implementing, and just the way the media has taken it in all these different directions. And, I'd love to first off just to get your, from your perspective, how would you describe to somebody the basic tenets of manifestation?
Well, of course, I think many people already understand, but I think that understanding also has some misconceptions. So, of course, manifestation is the ability to embed an intention and then have, if you want to say, your brain manifest that intention. The question is, how do you do that? And of course, everyone is manifesting on some level, but it's also like an athlete. If you want to become proficient, you have to practice, and you also have to have a coach, if you will, teach you how to go from the beginning, if you will, where you sort of just have an idea versus how do I get the maximal benefit, or how do I max out the ability to truly manifest and use all the different brain networks and the knowledge we have based on neuroscience to make that happen. But the other comment I made is many people have a misconception about manifesting. And what I mean by that is that books like The Secret, as an example, they imply or even directly state that this is a method to get you what you want. And it puts it into the context of I want this, I want that. And in many ways, it's a materialistic, self-absorbed, narcissistic perception of how manifestation works. And that's quite the opposite of how to have it work at its best. The other aspect I think that confuses so many people is that it's self-focused, but they don't realize the difference between how, if you want to use the term, Western capitalist society has brainwashed them into believing that we should chase quote unquote success, and meaning in a Western capitalist narrative, money, power, position. And having done that myself, I did all of these actions. And in fact, I manifested all the I things. And at the end of it, I was hoping that external affirmation would take care of all my insecurity and shame because of the baggage that I and many of us carry from our childhoods. And if I just did all of these things, I would be happy. Having achieved all of these things, whether financial or professional success, I was still empty and hollow, even in the face of having all these things. And in fact, it was like every time I climbed to the top of the mountain and thought I was victorious, there was nothing there for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So some of my listeners know this if they've been listening for a while, but I grew up in a household. So my mother is she's a psychotherapist, but she started in hypnotherapy. So I grew up being introduced to all different kinds of like complementary and alternative healing modalities and hearing about manifestation via the law of attraction language. And this was back in like the late 90s, early aughts. And it's been really interesting to see how that conversation has evolved and where it's evolved to. And I really appreciate you sharing sort of how the capitalist society lens has been used to view this. And it's so, I'd love to hear, what are some maybe examples of that, if you're comfortable sharing that, what that might look like.
Sure. So let me go backwards a little bit and share my own brief backstory. I grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child, was partially paralyzed, had a seizure disorder, chronically depressed, attempted suicide multiple times. We were on public assistance. And I share the story in my initial book called Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, which actually was a New York Times bestseller in 8 countries. I think it's in 36 languages. But the reason I mention that is that what saved me in some ways was actually walking into a magic shop. And without belaboring that whole story, I met a woman who had an extraordinary personality. And in the magic shop, she was the owner's mother, had nothing to do with the magic I was interested in, but taught me a different type of magic. But she taught me a meditation practice, which gave me the tools to have belief in myself and to deal with many of the, if you will, the limited beliefs so many of us have. Because when we tell ourselves, I'm not good enough or I can't, then by definition, that becomes reality. But she taught me a manifestation practice or a visualization practice. I was 12, actually, when this happened. But in my worldview at that time, she said, imagine everything you want. Well, I had several wealthy friends, although obviously I was not. And that's how I saw the world, that they seemed to live a quote unquote good life. And, one of the things on my list was owning a Rolex watch and also having a Porsche, silver Porsche Targa, and living in a mansion and having $1 million and becoming a doctor, et cetera. And I achieved every one of those things through, the very typical manifestation techniques. But here was the problem. Having achieved every one of those things, I was more miserable than I had ever been in my entire life because I kept waiting for something to happen when I reached the top of the mountain and there was never anything there. And I'm sure you know there's what we call hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. And for our listeners, hedonic happiness essentially is the motivation to maximize pleasure, limit pain. It's very much immediate satisfaction, and it's typically associated with material things. The problem with it is that that sense of happiness is both shallow and transitory. That's what I chased after, and it gave me nothing. And only after, if you will, having reached the quote unquote pinnacle of success, followed by losing $80 million in 6 weeks and being bankrupt, which put me on a path of deep self-reflection, I realized that I had spent decades chasing a chimera. There was nothing there for me at the end. And through this period of reflection, where I had to sort of analyze my life to that point, I realized that my entire focus had been on me. I need this. I want that. And even being a doctor, even though I was a good doctor, it was still, I'm a doctor. I am important. It wasn't, I'm a doctor to be of service. So as I went through this period of reflection, and I had borrowed $15 million from the bank, which wanted their money back after I lost the dot-com situation. I had to deal with the banker and my lawyer. But the interesting thing was I had made some allocations of stock to go to charity. And when I was dealing with my lawyer, he said, Jim, I have great news for you. You know, we were supposed to file this paperwork for you to give the stock away, but we had not done that. And you actually don't have to give it away. You can keep the stock. And he said, so, you know, you're not broke. And after this deep period of reflection, though, I said, listen, I want you to go ahead and give it away. And that turned out actually to be $30 million. And I built health clinics and programs for the disabled, endowed some chairs, and paid for some research. But the point of that was what I realized, I had been chasing the wrong thing. And if you look how we evolved as a species, we have evolved to care, connect, love, be compassionate. And when I changed the focus from a self-centered to one of outwardly being of service, everything changed. And fundamentally, though, that's the message of this book, is the maximal way to manifest is when you care for others, because that's when your physiology works its best. That's when these cognitive brain works their best and interact at their best. And as a result, not only you benefiting others, but you're benefiting yourself, because your physiology, both in the brain and your peripheral physiology, work their best when you're being of service to others. And that is how you maximally manifest.
Yeah, I love it. See, part of why I went so clinical with my training is because I wanted to close the loop, because I had all the alternative introduction growing up, but I really wanted to also have the science to put it all together. And I'm fortunate that I get to do that every day. But so this is why I love what you're talking about. But tell us a little bit about, like, physiologically, what's happening. Like, I know one of the things that you touch on in your book is the role of attention, for example. But I'd love to hear, as much as you're willing to share about just physiologically what is happening that is causing us to, what's creating a better stage for this manifestation to occur, I suppose.
Well, I think there's several aspects of this. And in the book, as you know, I give a 6-step or 6-week program, how to maximize your manifestation. But the first thing is to realize we're all attempting to manifest all the time. The reality is, it's like getting into shape or running. Most of us sort of casually do it, and we're not really thinking about it. And we sort of do it, but that's not the efficient way to do it. And you cannot run a marathon from day one. And a lot of people think that, oh, well, just teach me this and I'll make it happen tomorrow. One is these things take time and effort, even though the first sentence of the book, as you know, says the universe doesn't give a fuck about you. And it says, because the universe doesn't have any fucks to give. And what I mean by that is that there is no magical power outside of yourself that is judging you. You are the determinant. And many people don't understand that. They end up having limited beliefs because they listen to narratives that tell them they're not good enough, they're not worthy, and they tell themselves that. And if you say, I cannot, or it is impossible, or I don't deserve, that becomes truth. So, one of the first things is to realize that you have immense power. There's a philosopher by the name of Epictetus. He was a Stoic philosopher and his slave. And one of the profound statements he made was, I cannot control my external circumstances, but I can control how I respond to them. And this is really, really true. We have immense power within us. We just have to get rid of our limiting beliefs. And so we have to learn how to be self affirming, kind to ourselves, because many of us are more critical of ourselves than anyone we know. So that is an important aspect of this. And the second is that many of us have a belief in what we think we want, but we don't understand what we need. And this gets back to this issue of hedonic happiness I was talking about versus eudaimonic happiness, which is when you do actions in service of others. That's when your physiology works at its best. It's when your brain network cooperate at their best. And that level of happiness is far different. It is deep and it is long lasting. And the wonderful thing is, when you look at the world through that lens, your physiology, both brain and peripheral physiology, work their best. And that's how you're most likely to manifest things. But also, it changes how you look at the world in the sense that when you're looking out externally, being of service, the things you think you want change. And in fact, you get everything you want at the end of the day, but the starting point has to be looking through the lens of being of service and how can I benefit others? And then you do, in fact, get everything you want. And I don't want to put this into a narrative that somehow you're supposed to self-sacrifice and not enjoy anything in your life. You can have everything you want, but the first part has to be caring for others and being of service to others.
Thank you for making that distinction, because that is something that I do feel gets ingrained where it maybe should not, the self-sacrifice to the point where, when someone is at least this has been my observation, and honestly a little bit my experience as a recovering people pleaser, when somebody is self-sacrificing to the point that their own health and well-being takes a hit, like their ability to be supporting others also is diminished. And so it almost ends up working against that goal of being of service.
Well, and of course, this is where, if you want to call it compassion fatigue or empathic burnout, come into place. And oftentimes, children who grow up in environments where they have to be an adult become people pleasers, and they feel they have to care for everyone. And this is especially true among physicians and nurses. They are not able to set boundaries, and they're so focused on the other that they don't care for themselves. And then, of course, that causes a whole variety of problems. So the best way to care for yourself is to understand who you are. And I think this is also the fundamental nature of so many of us, because many of us grow up with childhood trauma. And I described some of my own, and mine, I used to think it was very rare, but I find many, many people grow up in dysfunctional and challenging backgrounds. And oftentimes they don't appreciate how those have impacted how they see the world, but also impact every action they do in life. As an example, I'm sure you're familiar with people who they always pick a dysfunctional partner. And it's not the first time. It'll be the second, the third time they go, I don't understand. Why do I keep finding these people? And the reason is because you have been programmed from childhood to find codependent people, because oftentimes that represents a parent or a loved one, or a dysfunctional relationship that is in many ways very traumatic, but is associated with a love figure, embeds dysfunctional behavior. And if you don't have any self-awareness how you sabotage yourself, or how this baggage is having such a negative influence on how you act, then you can't do anything about it. So I think that is also a part of it, is to actually sit down and look at your life in some ways and say what has worked, what hasn't worked, and the things that haven't worked, what are the impediments to move forward.
So I'm actually, what question I want to ask you next. There's different directions we could go. what in thinking, actually, I want to talk first about unintentional manifestation, because as you're talking about people ending up in these same dysfunctional situations, it's just making me think of that. And I'd love to hear, I know you do speak a bit about this in the book, but, if you could tell our listeners about what unintentional manifestation looks like and how it can be problematic.
Well, sure. I mean, as an example, we talked about the baggage we carry from childhood, and it can be problematic because it has an impact on every aspect of your life. I mean, as an example, if you have been in a relationship, let's say with your father, who's demeaning to you, or physically abusive, or even sexually abusive, then you create a very challenging situation between how a child perceives love, and then that connects with this negative behavior. And therefore, you keep repeating the same pattern because you translate, and all of us want to be loved, cared for, but you translate somebody being abusive to you as a sign of love. And then obviously it doesn't work out many times. And then you find another person who you think is in some way going to be different, but you pick the exact same repeat, and it goes on and on. And so if you don't have insight or self-awareness and haven't sort of analyzed what has worked and what has not worked, then you're going to be on the same treadmill doing it over and over again. And again, as I was saying, we're all looking for love. And, the things we manifest is we're in our mind going through a narrative. I want this. I need this partner. And you do manifest it, but it's not a healthy manifestation. And so the idea here is, how do we create a understanding of manifestation enough where we figure out the difference between what we think we want and what we actually need. And this is the difference between hedonic pleasure and eudaimonic happiness associated with purpose and meaning. So that's the first part. You have to have that awareness before you can move forward. The other thing is you also have to be patient. As we're talking about the example of the person who wants to learn how to run a marathon. Many of us say, okay, I'm going to read this 10-page book about manifestation and the law of attraction and all the woo-woo and pseudoscience that tied up in it. I'm doing this and I expect this to happen next week. That's not the way it works. One is you have to learn to do it correctly. Two is you have to really understand what you really want. And that comes down typically to what you actually need. And then you have to do the practices, which are not a one and done. You have to utilize essentially your sensory organs to embed your intention into your subconscious and have these cognitive brain networks function together for you to maximize it. One aspect is understanding that we get about 100 million bits of information a second from our sensory organs, but we're only able on a conscious level to deal with about 50 to 100, because most of that information goes to maintaining our body's functions at an unconscious or subconscious level. But you can actually consciously embed your intention, and you do this by value tagging, if you will, what that intention is. And typically, a part of our brain, this brain network, which is a collection of cells or neurons in the brain, one is the default mode network. And this is what happens when we mind wonder or are just thinking about things. It's typically self-referential. But this is also where we create a vision of who we want to be or what we want. And that's wonderful. And that's sort of the first process. But the other aspect is that has to then be embedded into what we call our salience network. How do we make something salient or a value? And that has to be associated with maintaining, if you will, our attention and have it finally focused. Once you're able to attend and get the attention of the salience network, and the salience network then acts, if you will, as a subconscious bloodhound trying to put the pieces together to make something manifest. And what I mean by that is, as an example, there's a project I've been working on for some time and have put it into my attention or have value tagged it. And I'm sure you've been in a room where at a party where it's very noisy. If somebody says your name, you always hear it, right? You turn to it because it's deeply, deeply embedded in your unconscious and it identifies you. So you're always attuned to that. Well, this is how making something salient also works. Once it has your attention, the salience network is out there looking for ways to make it happen. And I was using myself as an example. I was working on a project and I was at a coffee shop and it was very noisy. Yet, over all the noise, I heard somebody talking about exactly what I was interested in. You see, so that created a synchronicity and an opportunity. So I ended up going over and introducing myself and talking to them, and we're working together. And this is how manifestation works. It creates the possibilities, the opportunities that are always there. You're just not attuned to them. And once you're attuned to them and that connects, this actually has an effect on your executive control network, which gives you access to meaning and prior experiences. But it's sort of the to-do side of the house to make it get to that level. Once you've identified the synchronicity, it then comes on a conscious level for you to act. And that's how it works. So the best way to get your executive control networks to function is actually when you look through the lens of compassion, because that is the lens of love, if you will. And what I mean by that is if you're anxious or fearful or insecure or filled with shame, that activates your sympathetic nervous system, the flight, fight, or freeze response. When that response is initiated, that creates fear, which shuts down your executive control network because you're just trying to survive. So it's not giving you access to all the possibilities. And it also shuts down your salience network. So this is why I say it's important that you maximize the ability of these different brain networks to interact at their best to have you be able to manifest things. And what you also realize is when you change your perspective like that, it also changes your understanding of what you actually want. And you understand the difference and you understand the power that difference makes in terms of others and yourself. The Dalai Lama has said, if you want to make others happy, be compassionate. If you want to be happy, be compassionate. And fundamentally, that is the nature of this book. And that is how all of these brain networks work. And it also makes your life fundamentally happier.
I love that. I think that sometimes it, as you were saying earlier, it gets, we're conditioned as humans in today's society to be so focused on the external that the importance of how we're affecting other people and how that feels internally sometimes gets clouded over, we'll say.
Well, and the thing is, when you're focused on yourself, what happens is that you become blind to all sorts of other things. And it's unfortunate because all of us want to have what we want. And, people get confused, as you were just saying earlier, about you have to be some sort of self-sacrificing person. Listen, do I like to live in a nice house? Of course. I drive a Porsche. I don't feel bad about that. My point is, yes, I have things that I've wanted and that I enjoy. But the difference is an understanding between needing those things to the point where you think if you don't have them, it diminishes you. As an example, if I lost everything, the house, the cars, whatever status I have, I am still me and I am still worthy of love and I'm a nice person. I care for others. And all that other stuff is just external stuff that I don't need. It's great to have, but I don't need it. For other people, though, their identity is tied up in these things because they falsely believe that they absolutely have to have that or they're nothing. And in many ways, this is the problem with the nature of the influencer class in our society. And what's so sad is you look at young people. I mean, if you talk to young people, they'll say, I want to be famous. I want to be an influencer. I want to be rich. I mean, this makes up over 80% of kids. And it's terrifying. And the thing is that if you're looking through that lens, you're always going to be unhappy. As an example, I mean, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the fact that many quote unquote influencers, they're creating a false narrative about who they are. They're wearing all this makeup, they're using filters, they're setting stages that aren't realistic and in no way represent their lives. And they know every day they're being completely inauthentic and spreading untruths. And this is why so many of them are unhappy and so many of them have mental health issues. And conversely, what's so sad is you have a lot of young people trying to find themselves, trying to find purpose, and they get polluted by these narratives. And they look at these people as actually representing truth. And when in no way do they represent that at all. And for that group of people, that also leads to a lot of mental health issues and a sense that they're not worthy. And I would suggest to you that the problem with so much of modern society is we're terrified of being who we are. We're so terrified of being judged by others, and we chase these narratives that are not wholesome and fulfilling, but lead us down to this path of narcissism and self-absorption. And if you're able to be authentic, actually, that is extraordinarily powerful. When you're authentic, when you care for others, that actually attracts people to you. And I talk about some of this in the book in the sense, as an example, of oscillations or vibration. And one example I use is your heart. When your heart is aligned, and this is the connection between the brain and the heart, and we can talk about that a little bit. Yeah. But you actually project energy from yourself about 5 or 6 feet beyond yourself. And that energy you carry with you is very, very powerful, not only on having an effect on other people, but also them having an effect on you. And this is why I'm sure you've met people who they walk in a room and the energy completely changes in a positive way. You walk into another room and it's completely the opposite. And you're saying, how the hell do I get out of here? And it's because the energy they carry, and I'm sure you would agree, typically those types of people aren't in the mindset of me, me, me. They're in the mindset of, we are part of a team. How can we work together to make things better? I respect you. I respect your dignity. I respect who you are. I appreciate how you're supporting this project. I care about you. And that is really how not only do you become a person people want to be around, but that's how you manifest things. And it's interesting, and I'm sure you've heard of this. If you get a group of women who live together, usually in a few months, their menstrual cycles align. And this is the nature of being in a situation where that energy manifests and it makes everyone better or more aligned, if you will.
I really was struck by what you had to share about how others' energy can impact us. And I mean, I grew up hearing about this, but it wasn't until I was working as a healthcare provider where I started to notice, maybe just because it was so much more energy on a daily basis, but I found that early in my career, I didn't do anything to protect my energy. I didn't meditate. I didn't, I have all my little rituals and things that help me feel like my energy is clear. So I'm able to, do the work I need to do, but still feel like a functional human at the end of the day. I feel like I always need to be intentional about it. I remember finding out what an empath was, and I was like, oh, that's what's wrong with me. It was okay, I have a word for this now. But I'm curious to hear, as a doctor, was that something that you found came up in your work with patients of just feeling those energy transfers or noticing that impacted your experience as a clinician, as a human?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of evidence to support that. As an example, neurosurgeons are not known to be the touchy-feely type of doctors oftentimes, but it makes a huge difference. First of all, when a patient comes to see you, the very nature of that process is one in which they're very anxious and afraid, right? They don't know what's going on. If you can take the time, one, to listen which all of us can learn to do better if you can actually listen. Nowadays people go to the doctor doesn't even look at you. He's on his computer typing, asking you questions, which is the worst thing you can do. In fact, I absolutely 100% of the time refuse to participate in that. I will sit there with the patient. I won't have the computer open. I won't be typing. I'll be talking to them, looking them in the eye, and I'll do that stuff later because I think it's unhealthy to do that. So paying attention, listening, and then leaning forward like you're interested, touching the patient, and understanding that because they're fearful, they're not always listening. In fact, studies have been done that when doctors give patients try to get informed consent, where you say this could happen, that could happen, almost 80% of them don't even hear any of it. And some of them will deny the doctor even talked about it, even though they videotaped it. And this is the nature of how fear and anxiety distracts you from the present moment. And so when you do those actions, what happens to the patient? They tolerate less anesthesia. They require less pain medication. They get out of the hospital quicker. Their length of stay is diminished. And their 30-day readmission rate is also diminished. I'll give you another example just to show how compassion can have a powerful effect. Many people who work in the medical profession and the ER know that there is a subset of people who repeatedly show up in the emergency room. And typically these are people who are poor, also people who have mental health issues or drug and alcohol issues or personality disorders or all of the above. And it was interesting. They assigned a nurse to meet with these people and talk to them and care for them, show interest, listen to them without doing anything else. And that in and of itself decreased the rate of these people coming to the ER and almost 50%. Because most people want is to be loved and to be cared for, and to have a sense that people recognize their dignity and care about them.
I love that. And it's, I often think about, my dad passed away a number of years ago, but something that he said that really stuck with me was that, you never want to leave people wondering how you feel about them, to always be your authentic self and really express how you feel. And, that showing that kind of attention and care, it really, people remember that and they respond to that. And it really just, in terms of having just authentic relationships. And, I know for myself, that it's really important that my patients and clients feel heard and seen, because
sure,
it's really, it's something a lot of people will tell me is not the norm for them.
No, believe me, I know that absolutely that's the case, because unfortunately, so many caregivers are in this uncomfortable position of working for a corporate entity that is not interested in them or the patients per se, but is fundamentally interested in how do I maximize profit. And as a result, it looks at the caregiver as a widget in a machine who has to perform, and not as a human being who's trying to help others. And you should not be put on a time clock to be told how long it takes you to see somebody in an authentic, appropriate way. And even for me, in the system that I have been in, I don't follow any of the rules. I refuse to see 20 patients a day. If somebody needs an hour and a half to talk to me or for me to deal with their problem, that's what they get. And I'm probably one of the lowest paid neurosurgeons when I was doing that full time, because the sad thing is the compensation mechanisms are also upside down, in the sense that I only get paid, or I maximally get paid, when I operate on people. Well, I will tell you that half of the people I would see would be in second opinion, right? And all of those, or most of them, were already told they need surgery or had been scheduled for surgery. Yet at least 60 to 70% needed no surgery whatsoever. And I would tell them that. Well, if I tell them they don't need surgery, the $10 or $15 or $20,000 the surgeon would make now comes down to a few $100s. And so while almost every doctor would tell you, I never make decisions based on money, you simply need to look at these statistics to show you that, in fact, on a subconscious level, there's no question that they do. I mean, as an example, when they put out a new procedure, typically they pay a lot more for it because it's a new procedure. There may be new training involved, et cetera, et cetera. And if the system decides that's not useful, you'll see every doctor jump on the bandwagon, the numbers go up. And then if there's, we're not going to pay for that anymore, wow, it crashes back down. And that's reality. And it's unfortunate. So finding doctors who are honest brokers, it's hard because we convince ourselves, and humans are very good at convincing themselves that the decisions they make are unbiased and are the right decisions, when in fact, you have to constantly be on your toes and reassessing yourself and not surrounding yourself with yes people to not be dishonest with yourself.
And you bring up a point that I actually also wanted to ask you about because it's so prevalent in so many aspects of our world today. I mean, physician burnout, that is a very obvious case of this. But I've found I work with people from all different backgrounds, and I've had my own adventures with burnout as well. But burnout is a big issue. It's a public health issue, honestly.
Absolutely.
But in what ways would you say that burnout can block us from manifesting what we truly are, what we truly desire, what we're truly meant to do or be or feel?
Sure. No. First of all, the nature of burnout is one of fear, right? When you become numb to sort of your feelings, and when you get in that mode, it's a fear-based mode, which stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, your flight, fight, or freeze. That disengages your executive control networks, which make things happen or give you choices or options. So you suddenly become isolated. When the sympathetic nervous system is engaged, your options decrease, you become closed, shut down, and you're just trying to survive. And obviously, that's an extraordinarily unhealthy response, but it is a response that has been genetically embedded in us. And it's the oldest response that we have from an evolutionary perspective. And so, how do you get around that? And part of that is understanding how your brain works, and also on some level, emotion regulation. And emotion regulation, while not directly related to the book itself, is extraordinarily important, because if you don't know how to respond except in a fear-based manner, then you're not going to be able to manifest. Because that shuts down these various brain networks and pulls you inward. And so emotion regulation's very important. There's a saying attributed to Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Now, I say attributed to, since no one's been able to find this, and Wayne Dyer was the first person who quoted him saying this, but in his writings, it's never been found. But it's similar to what he says, which is, between every stimulus or event that happens to you, between stimulus and response, there's a pause. And within that pause lies your freedom. And what I mean by that is many of us are reactive to events. And then, of course, as soon as you're reactive, that stimulates your stress response, or your sympathetic nervous system engagement, versus pausing a little bit and realizing that sudden feeling of fear, that doesn't have to be, and oftentimes it's not appropriate. So when you're able to regulate that, you realize that if you are calm for a few seconds instead of reactive, you'll see other options available to you, because then once you've waited a few seconds, your executive control network is back online again, and you can make appropriate decisions.
Love that. That pause is magical. It's like, oh my goodness, just that deep breath just to collect your thoughts. It's amazing how much that can change your experience.
Well, of course. And there's this example I give a lot of times, which is there was a young physician I was working with on a project, married, 2 children. I think he was about 32. And one day, and we'd meet every couple of weeks about this research project, but one day he came in like just a sort of a jerk. Normally he's a calm, nice guy, but he was like being very aggressive, challenging. And, like many of us, our initial response when somebody comes on aggressive or forcefully is to sort of dig in our heels and give it right back to them, right? And in this instance, I paused for a second and I looked at him, I said, Charles, this isn't like you. What's going on with you that's sort of causing this? Because I don't understand why you would even be upset or antagonistic about this. And he looked at me for a second and he burst into tears. And it turned out that he had quit his job and was going to another position. And because he had a young family and they were healthy, he did not get the COBRA insurance or the gap insurance that we have to have in the United States to give you health insurance when you're between jobs. And it turned out that his wife had gone to see the doctor and she had a lump in her breast and it was cancerous. So what was going on in his head was, oh my God, I don't have health insurance. I have 2 kids. My wife has cancer, right? So he was terrified. And our interaction was one where it had nothing to do, his emotional response to me per se. It had to do with the baggage he was carrying, and he didn't know what to do. Now, the fortunate thing is that we were able to get him retroactive COBRA insurance. His wife got the biopsy and also had it resected. She needed no further treatment because it was found when it was quite small, and she was fine. But again, it emphasizes how we have a tendency to respond. And if we take a more measured response and pause, then actually we see the true nature of so many things.
Oh my goodness, very, very much so. I was always brought up being taught that we never know what's going on with someone else, and it's so true. On both sides, right? Like sometimes we have things going on and other people have no idea. I remember when my dad was sick, I wrote about this in my second book. I remember I kind of wished I had a light blinking over my head that was like, please don't be an asshole to me. Or maybe I put jerk because it was like, it had to be PC. But yeah, it was just, when you're in that state, it's challenging to show up as a person in the world. And not everyone is compassionate enough to ask what someone might be going through.
Well, yeah. And, again, it gets back to so often we're focused on ourselves, and I certainly get that. But again, self-focus is often the worst thing we need, and it leads to rumination. And so oftentimes, even for people who are depressed, the best thing they can do is actually to be of service to others. And that gets them outside of themselves and also see that other people are suffering. And 2, they can have an impact on other people. And the very nature of those 2 things actually improves their own mental health.
That was a huge thing for me, like during some very challenging times, was just being able to show up and do a job where maybe I couldn't cure someone's disease, but I could help them have a better experience, help them have a better day. I remember at the time finding that very soothing when I felt like I couldn't control, my father's health journey.
I'm sure, yes.
But now I know we have just a few minutes left. And you've been so gracious with your time and sharing your expertise with me. I had one last thing I wanted to ask you about manifestation before I have a few questions for you, just about some of where people can find your work and learn more. But a lot of our listeners are people who are looking to better their lives, to feel more aligned, to feel healthier mentally and physically. And if somebody is looking to, manifest a healthier life, or to feel better, or to feel successful, or whatever it might be that they are looking to call in, to kind of like my mother, are there any first steps that you might recommend for them that they can take to just begin manifesting?
Sure. And I want to preface this by saying I don't in any way want to imply that somehow if you use these techniques, everything in your life is going to be perfect, or we're going to change the fundamental negative structural aspects of certain parts of our society. That being said, we can certainly improve our life situations. And first, we have to recognize our ability to do so. 2, we have to recognize that we have to look through the lens of compassion. But I think the other thing that's very important, and we emphasized this a little bit before, is it doesn't happen overnight. Some people do a practice and they'll go, why the hell hasn't it happened? As I said, I've been working on a project for 13 years and it hasn't happened. I'm confident it will happen. And I talk about something called optimistic disposition, which is very powerful also, but to go slow. And, if you're trying to become a marathon runner, you don't run 26 miles that first day. You wake up and you may walk half a block. And then the next day you wake up. So there has to be work, intention, and acting. And you have to do all of those things. Even though the book starts out with the universe doesn't give a fuck about you, I would also say that God only helps those who help themselves. You have to do the work. So I think that's a very important thing. And the other aspect is not get discouraged, and also understand that while you may have a very clear vision of what you want or what you think should happen, the reality is that we don't control every aspect. As an example, let's say, and I'm getting into the sort of the selfish aspect, but let's say, I want this blue Ferrari. And you get a red Porsche. You go, well, God, manifestation doesn't work at all. Well, it may have been that the blue Ferraris were all sold out. And you got something that was very similar, but it wasn't exactly what you wanted. And so you should be thankful and have gratitude. And one of the most powerful things for any of us is having a understanding of how powerful just gratitude and being thankful is, and how that also relates to maximizing the manner in which these brain networks work at their best.
Thank you for sharing that. That is really valuable information. Now, this is just scratching the surface of what people can find in your new book, which is at the time of, so I know it hasn't quite come out to recording today, but it is coming out in May. If people want to learn more about your work, buy your books, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, one is there's a center I run at Stanford that focuses on compassion for self and others and how to teach that. And we have a whole variety of research projects and work related to that. And that's at ccare.stanford.edu, ccare.stanford.edu. If you want to learn specifically about this book or my first book, you can find that at jamesrdoty.md.com, jamesrdoty, D-O-T-Y, MD.com. And I would just like to throw something else out there, which might benefit some individuals. I've also been working on a mental health app that actually is quite interesting in that it uses emotion assessment using facial expression, voice analysis, context of speech, combined with a conversational AI knowledge base of compassion-focused therapy and psychology, which is then connected to a human avatar that you can actually talk to and interact with. And this is actually designed for people who have the anxiety and stress of living in the modern world. And that can be found at Happi, Happi, .ai. And actually, we're just testing the product right now. So it's free. And any of your users who want to give it a try, that would be fantastic. And please send me any thoughts to improve it or its deficiency so that we can actually create the best thing out there to help people. Because so many people are suffering with anxiety and fear and a sense of inadequacy, sadly. And I think this can help a lot of people.
Thank you. We will be sure to link to all of that in the show notes so people can find it. That sounds incredible. Okay, so I have one last question. I know we're a tiny bit over time, but one question I ask all my guests, and that is because there's just so many ways to interpret it and so many ways of looking at it. I know it can evolve day to day, but Dr. Doty, today, at this moment in time, what does healthy living mean to you?
Well, healthy living in many ways has to do with what actions can you take to maximally affect your mental and physical health. And as we have repeatedly seen, it actually relates to being kind to other people. And it's fascinating. Something that is low cost, requires only for you to care, is the greatest benefit to you in terms of your own mental and physical health. And if you look at the work of Bob Buettner in regard to the blue zones, if you look at the 85-year-old adult development study out of Harvard run by Robert Waldinger about longevity, the maximal contributor to an individual living longer and being healthier, while diet is important, exercise important, etc., by far, the greatest contributor is to care for others, to have depth of relationships and meaningful relationships. And in many ways, that's what all of this is about. The way you get what you want is to care for others. And if that is your focus, it may not work out exactly as you want or when you want, but these simple actions of doing that will actually make your life worthwhile and have depth of meaning and purpose. And hopefully that's what all of us want in this world.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Doty, thank you for being a guest on the show today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I look forward to this.
And for all of you guys who are out there listening, thank you as always for your time and your energy. If you like what you hear, consider leaving us a 5-star review. They do help me continue to bring you great guests like Dr. Doty today. Like, share, subscribe. You guys know what to do. Thank you as always, and have a wonderful day. And we will talk soon. Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.